We should also mention who are the fantastic organizers of this event who brought us all together here. So first of all, it's Polish Migrants Organized for Change, so in short, POMOC, which is a grassroots non-profit organization which since 2019 has fostered collaboration and actionable solidarity between Polish women in the UK and other migrant communities.
This evening is also brought to you by New Europeans, and Roger Casale is the Executive Director of New Europeans, and they have worked with Polish and other communities of EU citizens in London and across the UK since 2013, and its UK branch provides practical support and services to UK citizens in the UK, to EU citizens in the UK. It's a place for their voices and experiences to be heard.
And finally, our third organizer is Polonia Expressed, which is a UK-based grassroots initiative formed in the summer of 2020 as a pro bono courier company. And it was formed in order to fight voter disenfranchisement and legally deliver postal votes in Poland's presidential election in the middle of the pandemic. And this organization has since reinvented itself as a voice for the Polish community and a network of goodwill. Thank you very much for supporting this event and for bringing us all together. It is really important for us to take part in it. We would like to use this opportunity to encourage you to register to vote and to take part in the local elections. We think that it is a great opportunity for the Polish community to meet their future representatives online and also to have the voice and have a real influence on the local communities. And this is what this event is aimed at. Because we are providing live translation, there is a little bit of housekeeping that I need to mention tonight. To all of you that will be speaking live, a few words of advice. Please make sure that you, again, speak very slowly, or maybe not very, slowly is enough for the interpreters to be able to keep up with you. Make sure that you, that only one person speaks at a time. And for our audience, again, those of you who need interpretation, you can click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and pick the right language channel for your preference. Kate, shall we introduce our...
Yes, let's introduce obviously our panelists today. So we've got representatives from all the main parties standing in these elections, which is absolutely fantastic. We're really thrilled to have you here. Starting, we're going in alphabetical order on first names, so it's no particular order, but it's fantastic to have you all here. We can't wait to hear from you. So we have, and please do introduce just very briefly yourselves, and if I have slightly stumbled over your name, I apologize. Make sure you say it if I mispronounced it. So we have Adrian Hyralainen-Tret. He's a London Assembly candidate for the Liberal Democrats Party. We have Catherine West MP, who is the Shadow Minister for Europe and the Americas, and she is from the Labour Party. We have Harini Iyengar, who is the lead London Assembly candidate from the Women's Equality Party. And we also have Louise Calland, who is the London Assembly candidate for Merton and Wandsworth. She is from the Conservative Party. And our candidate from the Green Party is Marijn van der Geer. She is a London Assembly candidate for Ealing and Hillingdon. Right.
Okay, let's just give our guests a chance to say hello.
Yeah.
In the same order. Adrian, would you like to start? Please remember to unmute yourselves, of course.
Good evening, everybody. Pleasure to be here and look forward to the discussion and debate this evening.
Thank you. Catherine, over to you.
Dobry wieczór. Lovely to be with you this evening, and I'm representing the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, tonight.
Thank you very much. Harini?
Dobry wieczór. Bardzo dziękuję za zaproszenie na wydarzenie Polish Migrants Organized for Change i New Europeans i Polonia Express dla kandydatów do London Assembly. Cieszę się, że mogę przybliżyć Państwu program wyborczy Partii Równości Kobiet w Londynie, opowiedzieć o mojej kandydaturze oraz o sprawach, które są Państwu bliskie w tych wyborach.
Thank you very much. Louise, over to you.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I'm representing Sean Bailey, the Conservative candidate for Mayor of London, but also say that I have a 4-month-old who I've left to my husband to put to bed. So if you see or hear an exasperated baby and or person in the background, that's what that is.
Thank you very much. I'm sure our audience won't mind that kind of interruption. And finally, Marijn, over to you.
Hello, thank you so much for having me, and I'm very impressed with the pronunciation of my difficult name. It's spot on, so thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here as well, and I'm very impressed by the Polish of some of these candidates. All I can do is sing the 100 lat 100 lat song, so I can do that for you later if you want. But I'm really excited, and also I wanted to say that normally in hustings we'd all be together in real life, and if you feel like your question wasn't answered properly, you know, you could approach me afterwards and say, look, what did you mean? So obviously there's not really that opportunity here, so feel free to email me. I'm sure it's the same for the other candidates if it wasn't clear what I was trying to say. So but hopefully we'll manage this way. So thank you, and thanks so much for organizing this.
Thank you very much. We, of course, look forward to hearing from you, our audience. Those of you who are logged on with us on Zoom can use the question and answer function in order to interact with us. And those of you who are watching us on Facebook, please post your comments and questions underneath the live stream. But the questions that we are now moving on to have also been formed by yourselves. We asked our followers to get in touch with us and propose the answers that are important for the Polish community that could be asked in tonight's debate. And we have asked a few volunteers to join us tonight and to ask those questions on your behalf. So we are now going to move on to that part. And each of our candidates will have 2 minutes to answer each of those questions. Catherine is going to facilitate that and manage the timekeeping.
Yes, I'll do that.
I would like to ask the first of our volunteers, if she's with us, Magda Grzynkowska. Magda is a journalist based in London and in Edinburgh, and she's going to start with probably the fundamental question that every debate like that should begin with. Over to you, Magda.
Thank you very much. I was asked to ask this question in Polish, so maybe you would like to switch the channel. Szacuje się, że w Wielkiej Brytanii mieszka prawie 1 milion Polaków, z czego większość z nich w Londynie. Język polski jest najczęściej używanym językiem poza angielskim właśnie na Wyspach. W związku z tym jestem bardzo ciekawa, ponieważ wciąż zauważamy niskie zaangażowanie Polaków w proces demokratyczny w Wielkiej Brytanii. Zastanawiam się, czy Państwo, kandydaci na burmistrza Londynu, w jakiś sposób próbowali się zaangażować w kontakt z polską społecznością, czy kontaktowali się z polonijnymi organizacjami, I czy nie uważają, że to do tej pory trochę stracona szansa dla nich, żeby właśnie tę niszę zagospodarować jako swoich potencjalnych wyborców? Bardzo doceniam osoby, które powiedziały parę słów po polsku i pytanie do pozostałych osób, czy zamierzają nauczyć się polskiego? Dziękuję.
Right. Okay. Marta, are you going to read the question out in English, or are we?
Yeah, I can.
It might be, just in case. I think just to be
just
sure.
in case someone did not manage
Yeah.
to switch
Yeah.
to the translation in English. There are 900,000 Polish people living in the UK, many of whom live in London. And in fact, Polish is the most common non-British nationality. And the Polish language is also the second most spoken language in London itself. But at the same time, Polish community faces low voter turnout, and there seem to be some barriers in terms of their democratic engagement. So you, as our candidates, have you engaged with the Polish community? Do you find them to be your prospective voters? Maybe to some extent, it's a group that has not been reached out to enough by British politicians in the context of local elections. So how have you engaged with the Polish community to date? And finally, one little detail, as Magda said, she really appreciated those Polish words that have been spoken, and all of you who put that effort into learning a little bit in Polish. Have you considered learning some Polish yourselves?
Right, so we'll begin with Adrian, if you'd like to unmute, and I'll start the clock when you begin speaking, and you've got 2 minutes. So if you'd like to unmute, and then once you've started speaking, I'll start the clock.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your question, Magdalena. Dobrowecka. I don't have very much Polish, but I will do the one word that Catherine did earlier. So to do as much as I possibly can do to bring you into this very important discussion this evening. And it's around democracy, and it's around engaging with all our communities in London, particularly for us as we're all candidates or representing candidates to be mayor, GLA people on the Assembly. And therefore activating with our local communities is absolutely essential. For me, I've actually been engaging with the Polish community for a long time, but very, very particularly around the LGBTQ rights that are going on in Poland at the moment. The Liberal Democrats have set up a campaign to help and support the LGBT people in Poland with their people in this country, to try and create a twinning effect in terms of supporting and educating and challenging what rights are being lost in Poland. So it's really important for me as an LGBTQ person, someone who challenges human rights around the world, that Poland has as much democracy as everywhere else. And that's why it's really important that in London, we have such a significant Polish community, as you say, around 900,000 voters. And we really must get to all those voters so they can exercise their democratic right in voting for whoever they want to. But the important part is about voting, and that's really critical in the London elections. So my reaching out, particularly around the LGBTQ issues, but also around communities that we have. Lib Dem Friends of Poland is a particular group that has various community people within that group. So we do a lot of work locally, and I very much reach out to you more. And at the same time, I'm very happy to learn some Polish. I'm a linguist. I speak 5 or 6 languages. Polish isn't one of them, sadly, but I'm very happy to put that on record, and I'm happy to learn a bit more for next time.
Thank you. Wow, spot on. Thank you very much, Adrian. And yes, I know in the little clip before you were saying how important it is to vote, and you encourage people to, as long as they vote, you'd love them to vote for you and your party, but the important thing is to vote. So great. Catherine, would you like to begin? 2 minutes, and I'll just sort of raise my hand on, perhaps it's coming to the last 10 seconds. If that would help, that might be I'll do that in future.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Will do.
It's lovely to be with everybody this evening. And the most important thing is that for London, our representatives, whether they're MPs, councillors or the mayor, are interested in the place where many of us come from, because many of us in London come from different places. And we saw in the Brexit years, which we are still quite traumatised from in many ways, the real fight for the rights of EU citizens, including our largest community, the Polish-speaking community. And it's really difficult to quantify just how important EU citizens are to our city. And the Polish community goes above and beyond in every sector, whether it's in the white collar sectors, whether it's in keeping our roads safe, whether it's in our transport network or our care homes. We are indebted to our community who come from Poland. And we know that Sadiq Khan did visit Gdansk and Warsaw to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the start of World War II, and attended the 75th commemoration of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, where he donated £300,000 from London to help preserve the site for future generations. Because don't forget, Polish people haven't just been coming to the UK since 2004. We have a very strong tradition of Polish migration to the UK. And as the MP for Wood Green, I have many older Polish community members who have been here for a long time. And it was really lovely during the European election to see so many really wanting to vote, to reaffirm their commitment to being Europeans. And I feel that Labour in London has really taken the fight to the government on Brexit in general, and the question of EU citizens' rights. Thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you, Catherine. Again, absolutely spot on. Thank you very much. And as with all the candidates, the information where you can find out more about them is listed. And I noticed that Catherine's been President of London for Europe since 2018. Right, moving on. Harini, if you'd like to speak, and again, I'll just raise my hand in the last 10 seconds, and I won't start until you've start the clock until you've started to speak.
Hello, Magdalena. I'm afraid the time has come now for me to say thank you to my friend Maciek and my friend Kasia for their help and switch over to English. I am the child of two migrants who came to the UK to work, and I belong to the Women's Equality Party, and we have always openly stated that we support and stand with migrants in our policies throughout the debate about Brexit. And you'll see in our London Assembly campaign, we are calling on the Mayor to make London a sanctuary city in which migrant women also have access to women's refuges when they need to flee from abuse, regardless of their immigration status. In terms of engaging with the Polish community, I have to say that I have had the opportunity so far to engage on an individual basis with Polish friends rather than with community organisations. And so I'm really happy to be invited this evening by the three organisations to this hustings. And I had some interesting conversations with my Polish friends about the event, which I think is worth saying. So the main conversations I've had about Poland have sadly been about Brexit, their own status, how hurt and offended they feel, about difficulties they face in the labour market as migrants. All my Polish friends have first-class English. They all have experienced people pretending not to understand their accents and other forms of discrimination. But they don't feel that they represent the Polish community. They feel they're Londoners, and that has been how I have related to them. I had conversations with them about food because I have about 50 cookbooks, and in preparation for Brexit disaster, I bought a lot of sauerkraut, which I couldn't use up. And I have a lovely Polish cookbook, and it's a vegetarian Polish cookbook. And today I tweeted some of the things I cooked. And the funny thing is, the young man who wrote that book, Michał Kołkosz, sent me a compliment. He thought I had cooked it well. But an old Polish man told us both off on social media that bigos should not have vegetables. And I think it's really important that when we engage with the Polish community, we engage not just with patriarchs who want to represent the minority community. We must engage with women as well, and with all minorities and the full diversity of the Polish community.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm just looking, I know that you, as a human rights barrister, you've having acted in equal pay and employment rights cases, which I'm sure, you know, these matters, not just for the Polish community here, but I think, and of course, equality. So thank you very much. And so we're now going to move on to Louise. I'll wait until you start to speak before I start the clock. And again, the last 10 seconds, I'll raise my hand.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you, Magda, for your question. So for me, one of the best things about London is its diversity. So my grandfather came here, not from Poland, I'm afraid, but from Russia to flee the pogroms during the early 20th century. So my family know well what a welcoming city this can be. I also massively welcome the huge contribution that the Polish community have made to London. And it's very much my intention, I know Sean's intention, that Londoners can understand and can share in the Polish culture all the better. So Sean, for example, I know has recently engaged with the Polish community across all levels. He's done everything from meet the Polish ambassador to going to the POSC Centre in Hammersmith, and recently engaging as well virtually because of COVID restrictions with the Polish business community. From myself, here in Merton and Wandsworth, which is my patch, we've got a lovely Polish community in Balham. And so we've got the White Eagle Community Centre with the Catholic Church opposite. So I have on occasion gone down there and of course spoken to local small business owners, actually especially. One of the things I started up during COVID was actually a shop local campaign. So I know a lot of small businesses have been really very enthusiastic about that as a way to encourage people to look at shops perhaps they have been on their doorstep all along that potentially they haven't looked at before. So for me, I think voting is also incredibly important. I'm very lucky here in Merton and Wandsworth that actually my main opposition and all of representatives from the main parties are women. So we have a great range of wonderful women that people will be able to choose from and be able to vote for. And actually, that's definitely something I, again, personally have worked hard on for many years, wanting to both encourage women to vote more, but also to stand as well. So actually a lot of the community outreach I've done has been specifically around trying to target women to get them to vote more in the future.
Thank you, and that's great to hear, Louise. I think it's really important that, you know, that we remember it's actually whoever people actually choose to vote for, but you actually have your say at the ballot box. And I noticed that part of your sort of campaign side is supporting 100,000 homes, 100,000 new homes for £100,000, and also protecting and enhancing the fantastic local green spaces. So thank you very much. And moving on to Mayoral. If you'd like to speak, again, I'll raise my hand the last 10 seconds and I'll start the clock once you've begun.
Yeah. So, well, what else can I say, really? So we have Polish councillors, we have Polish members in the Green Party. I work almost on a daily basis with my Polish counterparts on deliberative democracy, the research coming out of Poland and the Citizens' Assembly, which was done in Gdansk, is far, far ahead of the UK democratic system. Although obviously at the moment there's a massive crisis, but I'm learning so much from deliberative processes that have in the past already happened in Poland. So I'm very grateful for that. Then I think as well that obviously this is an issue of the Polish community, but it's also an issue of the EU community and the feeling of being a foreigner in the country which you thought was your home. And this has been a huge challenge for me. This is certainly not the country I moved to 18 years ago. It's a very different country now than it was back in 2003. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. I think a lot needs to be done. There is a culture of scapegoating of migrants. There's a culture of racism. There's a culture of social injustice. And this isn't just to the Polish community, but I think for many people from different communities, including the other EU countries as well. So this is something that we at the Green Party have been calling out from the start. I mean, we never wanted Brexit in the first place, obviously. We are keen to protect the rights of EU citizens and the fact that they should be allowed to stand at the elections. I'm allowed to stand now, but who knows whether I'll be allowed to stand again. So these are things that we need to protect and make sure that they don't get taken away from us.
Thank you very much. And I noticed that you, as part of your what you're going to be pushing for is increasing support for youth, young people, including youth centres, and also protecting tenants' rights and rent control. So thank you very much. That's great. And we're moving on to the next question.
Well, but before we move on to the next question,
Apologies.
just a little short reminder to all of you who decided to attend today's event but haven't yet registered to vote. It's a high time to do it. Please make sure you register by the 19th of April in order to be able to vote on the 6th of May. Those of you who are already registered but are concerned about COVID, please bear in mind you can vote by post. So here you can cast a postal vote without giving any reason. It's actually very easy to register. All you need to do is to fill out a form and deliver it to your local electoral office by 5 p.m. on the 20th of April. So these are the two dates to bear in mind. 19th of April for registration to vote and 5 p.m. on the 20th for postal vote registration. You will find a lot more details, profiles of the candidate, upcoming events, volunteering opportunities, and a lot more on our campaign's website, www.shevotes.org.uk. And on that note, let's move on to our second question, which will be asked by an activist. So our second volunteer is Kamil Arendt. Hello, Kamil. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Kamil is a London-based and Poland-born activist, a co-founder of Polonia Express and a board member of CODE UK. His primary focus is on democracy, equality, human rights, and promotion of reason and science. Over to you, Kamil.
Thank you. So we are running slightly behind, so I'll try and be quick with my question. But this is one that's been on our minds for the last year, and I guess it would be really unusual if we didn't mention the word COVID. So my question will be centered around it as well. So the COVID vaccination program is implemented by the NHS, is being seen as a success, and rightly so. But some local communities in London are lagging behind the national vaccination rates, unfortunately. The same is true for some other much needed vaccination programs, like, for example, the MMR vaccine. This inequality seems to be driven by a number of factors: deprivation, vaccine hesitancy, and even conspiracy thinking, which seems to be particularly prevalent among Eastern Europeans and certain other ethnic minorities as well, as research indicates. In addition to that, in recent years, the public health allocations to London's boroughs have plummeted, and health service staffing is also looking worryingly low. How do you see the role of the Greater London Authority in reaching those local communities and reducing vaccine and, more broadly, health inequality? Thank you.
Right. If we can start with Catherine, please. I've got the 2 minutes, and again, I'll just raise my hand the last 10 seconds.
Thank you, Kate. Sadiq Khan began the European Londoners Hub to provide free resources for EU citizens and families to navigate their rights back when Brexit was first a thing. And since that time, the health messaging has also been folded into the European Londoners Hub. And there have been 1.4 million people who have been gaining access to that hub for information. And that has provided something which crosses the whole of London, so that if people are not very connected into their local area, because we know one of the issues with some of our communities is that they move house a lot, so that by having a London specific health service, a London specific service for European Londoners, health can be folded into that. And I think that's been a really exciting development. Sadiq's also worked very closely with Naheem Zadawi on developing enough supply of vaccine for London, because we did have a bit of a blip there where we weren't getting enough supply, and Sadiq met up with Nadeem Zahawi and we were able to get more supply for our great population, which is the largest, of course, in the UK. And he's also been active on community radio stations, visiting various centres, and in general promoting more funding for London, because we all know as Londoners that one of the things which is really holding us back in terms of public health is the lack of funding from the Tory government. And that's something which we, as I was a local leader before an MP, and from 2010 onwards, millions and millions and millions of pounds have been taken out of the health budget by the Tory administration, one after the other. And that's something which we have fought very hard on in Labour. And that's something which we've tried to make the case for the diversity of health need within the London population. And that includes our Polish workers who often move around and have particular health needs. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you. Louise, next, please. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. And I think this is a really important question and a very topical one. So thank you for asking it and giving us the opportunity to talk about this. So the great news, as we know, is that actually uptake so far is going well. About 95% of people aged over 60 have been vaccinated with their first dose, which is, I think, a record-breaking percentage of people. This is a huge uptake, much higher than things like the yearly flu jab, for example. But you're right, there are certain communities who aren't taking up the vaccine as well as others. So one thing I would ask everybody listening tonight is please talk to a friend, talk to a family member, encourage them if they are called up, please do go and get the vaccine. It's really important, and it will enable us to see our friends and families again and reopen up our economy, because actually I think talking to peers, talking to colleagues is one of the key ways in which we can really encourage communities to take up this vaccine. We also recognise, actually, I recognise that the Polish community are often in people facing jobs, so could be more severely affected. So this is really, really hugely important. From a practical point of view, I think it's important that there are awareness campaigns in a huge number of languages, Polish, of course, being one, and of course, as well, working with community groups, with religious groups, with trusted members of the community, people like church leaders, to encourage people in London who are potentially a little bit more hesitant about getting the vaccine, and give them the information they need to reassure people that it is safe and it's efficacious. So, for example, in Wandsworth, at the beginning of the COVID lockdown, we put £100,000 into our grants fund, which just went to community groups to help them disseminate all the information that they needed. And it's something that we would want to see repeated in order to get out information about this vaccine. Thank you.
Thank you. And Harini.
Thank you. I want to start by saying that my parents have both had the vaccine, and I encourage anybody who is eligible for the vaccine to have it. But I want to start by saying that at the heart of this question is not ignorance within the Polish community, it's a lack of trust in the state. And there may be good reasons for that, because of the Soviet era or because of their experiences in London. And so it's important to speak to people as equals and to understand why they're feeling this way and to build the trust back again. And you also said an important point, which is it's not just the COVID vaccine, it's childhood vaccines. So there's a much longer public health goal that needs to be reached. What troubles me in particular is the government's headlines about UK's world-class vaccination rates, ignoring the story underneath about certain communities who are being left behind, particularly in London, particularly minority communities and deprived communities. And also what is deeply troubling is care workers themselves, who are at high risk, have got low rates of uptake. I want some proper investigation and understanding of why that's happening. Is it because they are not being given paid time off? Are they being given transport to get the vaccine? Are they being educated about what the vaccine is for? And why is it? And we have a lot of concerns as a political party, the Women's Equality Party, for care workers. We can't talk about the NHS and health needs without also talking about care needs. Care workers' pay has failed to rise in line with other kinds of pay. They're some of the lowest paid workers. And despite their crucial role, which has been made apparent to everyone during the pandemic, we've seen claps and candles being lit for them instead of actually a pay rise. We are campaigning for there to be a care revolution in London to make London the best city for care workers. And that includes a real living wage of at least £10.85 an hour.
Thank you very much. And Marijn.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Harini, because I do think this is a massive social justice issue. I would also just reiterate that the Green Party supports the 15% pay rise for NHS workers. And also we want to introduce a housing scheme where key workers can actually afford to live closer to their work. At the moment, for example, Sean Berry did a study of the Royal Nursing College, and none of those nurses can afford to live in London, so they're being forced out of the capital even though they live here. So we would propose to tackle that as well. I think it's key that this vaccination thing becomes a non-political issue. I think it's true that people don't trust the people in charge, and I totally agree with that. It needs to become something that is political party, that we work on together, that it isn't a Labour or a Tory thing, that it's just a thing for the people, by the people, that this is an NHS thing. I also think we need to properly address the key anxieties, which also I fully understand people are worried about the speed at which it's been developed. And also we need to remember it is a universal right to refuse this. It's your right to refuse it. So we need to make it accessible. We need to give people the information they need. You know, this isn't about our economy. This is about human rights. So as much as I myself, when I get called up, of course, I will go and get the vaccine. I do respect that there is a problem there, and that communication needs to be much, much better. And I think that's all I can say about that for now.
Thank you very much. And Adrian.
Thank you, Kate. Well, I think what COVID has highlighted has brought forward the fact that there are health inequalities in London, and they've actually been more established in different ethnic minority groups. And unfortunately, that's probably as a result, as some of our other panelists have said, around mistrust of government. And the only way to overcome that is by having clear, welcome, open awareness campaigns, people in their local communities going to speak to people and then explaining why it's so important. I am absolutely clear that having a vaccine is absolutely key. And yes, it is a human right to do what you would like to do. However, for the safety and the support of the community, getting that message across to them in a educational and awareness way is really critical for having everyone take the vaccine as and when they're called to do so. But it has highlighted the inequalities in London for our different diverse communities. And that's something the Liberal Democrats will always fight for, in the sense that every community has a right to be treated equally, whatever their background, whatever their ethnic community, and particularly with the Polish community having such a large representation in London. It's absolutely crucial that we, as a community, as all, and make it non-political, as was mentioned by Marijn earlier. This is something that we're all got to put ourselves forward for, and to support each other. And therefore, we need to educate and help people where perhaps they are a bit reluctant and perhaps aren't completely aware of all the stipulations and consequences. And therefore, we need to make and go and support those communities in the process.
Thank you very much. And before we get to the third question, my eye actually slipped. So the first person to respond to the next question will be Harini, just so that we're clear. Okay.
And the next question is going to be asked in Polish. So those of you who need translation, please make sure you get the right interpretation channel on. And it will be asked by Magda Oldziejewska, who is a queer Polish migrant and organizer with the Polish feminist group Farsa and the London Feminist Library. Magda is also a PhD candidate at the Essex Business School. Magda, the floor is yours.
Dzięki Marta, dzięki za zaproszenie. Jako aktywistka, która współorganizowała wiele protestów prodemokratycznych na rzecz praw kobiet i osób LGBT+, i jako Polka mieszkająca w Londynie i obserwująca z przerażeniem wydarzenia ostatnich lat w Polsce, wiem, jak ważne dla demokracji i politycznie angażujące są protesty dla społeczności polskiej i nie tylko. Jakie jest Twoje zdanie na temat nowych przepisów antyprotestowych i w jakim stopniu prawo Londyńczyków do protestu w przestrzeni publicznej powinno być chronione lub ograniczane podczas pandemii i jaki ma to wpływ na sytuację protestową na dłuższą metę?
Thank you very much, Magda. I'll just read the same question in English very briefly for those of you who didn't manage to catch the translation. Magda said, I'm an activist who has successfully co-organized pro-democratic rallies, protests against the abortion ban in Poland, as well as campaigns for the rights of women and LGBTQ+ identified people. From my experience, I know how important, empowering and politically involving these events have been for the Polish community in London. And I've also been observing the developments in my home country, which motivated me to take part in them. So what is your take on the new anti-protest laws? And to what extent, in your opinion, Londoners' right to protest in public should be protected or curbed during the pandemic?
Right, so first up is Harini.
Thank you. The Women's Equality Party is a grassroots party with activist members. I myself have a background as an activist. In fact, I can show you if I remove my background. When I first became a founding member of the party and stood for public office, one of our senior women members made this beautiful banner for me, which has been on many marches and demonstrations with me. We are filled with admiration for the Strike Kobiet and the way you've organized so many people to come out in the streets in Poland. But at the same time, I must say that the right to protest is an important democratic right, but we are tired of being on the outside and begging to be listened to by the politicians in power. In the UK, and I'm sure in Poland, there are many, many women's campaign organizations, charities, NGOs, who have been working since before the First World War to raise women's issues of equality to the top of the political agenda. And we formed a political party in 2015, the Women's Equality Party, because we are tired of not being listened to by politicians. And we have challenged, in every election we've stood in, we've challenged the mainstream parties to take on our policies, which are well researched and which will work. And so whilst I am interested in respecting the right to protest, personally, I've had enough. I want to be elected. It's possible for a small party to win on the orange ballot. Small parties can and do win. I would like to be a feminist assembly member with a seat at the table inside City Hall. I can make them listen to our needs and look after the needs of women and minorities in London much better from the inside. So I give you respect and thanks for the protests. You will see me there sometimes with my banner, but I would like to work for you on the inside now.
Thank you very much indeed. And I have to sort of say on this matter, having written a play about the suffragette Emily Wilding Davison, I'm very aware that women, you know, 100 years ago. In fact, it's less than 100 years ago that all women had the right to vote. We've got, it's 2028 will be the anniversary, and we may well have still been waiting if we didn't have the suffragettes. So next up, Louise.
Thank you. And first of all, well done, Magda. I have to say, it sounds like you're really standing up for communities and causes that need your voice. So I hugely applaud you for that. So I think you're referencing the police crime sentencing and courts bill that, as you may know, is going through Parliament at the moment. And while it touches on a huge range of issues about enforcement and sentencing, it also touches on protests. So I will talk mostly to that, as that was, I think, what your question was about. So firstly, I want to say that freedom of expression is an absolute cornerstone of British democracy. The Conservative Party itself is founded on the idea that they want to give people more individual freedoms. So they are absolutely not trying to ban protests. And the vast majority of protests that happen, like the ones it sounds as though you're involved in, are completely lawful and would be totally unaffected by the changes. What the new measures are just trying to do is essentially to balance the rights of protesters, but also the rights of normal people to go about their business unhindered. I think we all have probably seen in the news recent scenes from Bristol, where the protesters became very violent. It ended up with a number of policemen and women being injured. And that is absolutely the sort of thing that this bill is trying to ensure doesn't happen, that these protests can just happen in a completely lawful fashion. So from my perspective and from Sean's perspective as well, things like the Black Lives Matter protest and the Sarah Everard vigil, we were both very keen that those did go ahead, and we're pleased to see that they did. Sean has been calling for the mayor and protest organisers to work constructively together to ensure that where people do want to protest during this time, they can do so under COVID-19 restrictions, everything from small practicalities like giving protesters a walking route to ensure that they can adhere to social distancing, things like that. So keep up the good work, and absolutely this bill is not going to change people's rights to protest within this country.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And now to Marine.
Yeah, this bill will obviously fundamentally change our rights to protest. The wording in the bill is extremely ambiguous. It's very dangerous and it's very scary. And I'm extremely concerned and frankly shocked that this is even being proposed. And I think we should all be extremely concerned. It's very open to interpretation. I know the exact wording hasn't been put through yet. And I know that, you know, that there is a lot to this bill. But just the developments alone and the fact that this is being passed at the moment is extremely, extremely worrying. It means that when a protest is inconvenient, people don't want it. We can march nicely on a road that's been designated for it. We can, you know, do our little protests and then go home and not cause any trouble, not ruffle any feathers. That is not what a protest is, of course, as we know. So we are categorically opposed to the protest clauses in this bill. The Green Party has a long tradition of activism. I myself am an activist as well. I am trying, as you can see, like Aruni is saying, to go through the official system now by being a candidate for the London Assembly for the Green Party, but it just isn't good enough. We are not being listened to. Obviously, my main issue is the climate and ecological emergency, which is going to see all of us suffer. If we think COVID is a crisis, wait and see what's to come. And so I think it's completely proportional to be a nuisance, as our friend Pretty likes to call us. And this has to be allowed. I can see there's been a lot of confusion with the police during protests about what they can and cannot do, because they're not used to these kind of non-violent protests. Just categorically against these proposals regarding protests.
Thank you, Marine. Moving on to Adrian.
Thank you, Kate. Great to see you, Magda. Thank you for the question. We know each other because we were both on the LGBTQ protests outside the Polish embassy back in last August. So great question. As you can imagine, as a Liberal Democrat, I absolutely believe in the right to protest. And the Liberal Democrats in Parliament will be voting against any measures that restrict us from being able to protest. It's an extremely important part of democracy, and it's an extremely important part of being able to demonstrate that you have these rights to do this. And as has already been mentioned, if women hadn't fought and demonstrated nearly 100 years ago, they wouldn't have got the vote. And therefore, the power of protest is incredibly important and should always be part of a democracy. The difficulty arenas that we've had over the last couple of weeks have shown, unfortunately, differing ways of interpreting the rules. And as Louisa Porritt, our Liberal Democrat mayoral candidate, called out against the Met Police for the way that they treated women at the Sarah Everard vigil. From my view, it was disgraceful. And whether there was miscommunication or whatever excuse that we have heard in today's report, which has come into the news, that wasn't good. That wasn't good enough. It wasn't acceptable. And we should always allow protests and vigils in a pandemic where socially distanced measures can be put in place to make sure that it's done in the best and safest possible way, but they should not be banned. And it was very clear to me that we had the Black Lives Matter protests last summer. They were able to be organised, socially distanced in a way that was permissible, but they didn't do that for the Sarah Everard grieving a couple of weekends ago. So I am very concerned by this bill, and I hope everybody else is listening and will be supportive that we won't support this bill and these measures.
Thank you very much, Adrian. And next, Catherine, please.
Thank you, Kate, for all your work on suffragettes. And together with Sarah Gavron, you've really educated us all in what the first women went through in the UK to get the vote. And if you haven't seen it, everybody, please go and see Suffragette, because it's a fantastic film and it puts to life the work that Kate and others have done on that agenda. And Magda, you have got an amazing record of standing up for women, and a big thank you to you, because obviously in Poland it is a very live issue, particularly around the abortion ban, and that's something which I have personally raised with the ambassador to the UK from Poland, because I'm the Shadow Minister for Europe, as well as LGBTQ issues. In the Labour in Parliament, 51% of women are 51% of MPs are women, and I can tell you that we're very unhappy about the Sarah Everard situation. We know that Sadiq Khan did meet with Reclaim the Streets to understand what their grievances were and how they wanted to see change. But in terms of the bill, the government's Police, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Bill, this would seek to introduce draconian measures that impose disproportionate controls on free expression and the right to protest, including criminalising protests for being too noisy and imposing a longer potential sentence for damaging a statue, 10 years, than the minimum sentence for rape, which would be 5 years. So I think we need to re-examine our values as a country, and particularly when you look at the work of, say, Vera Baird QC, who's the Victims Commissioner, and her work showing that the conviction rate for rape and sexual assault has dropped enormously. And that really goes back to the decade of austerity, and the fact that many of our courts are in complete crisis. The cases are way behind where they should be, and we've lost 50% of our police stations. So it's very rare for people to actually be able to walk in off the street for women and actually report a crime. I'll stop there, Kate.
Thank you very much indeed. Very interesting. And just one thing that occurs to me is that perhaps we can look to Poland, and I know we are you're answering questions from the Polish community, but perhaps we could listen to the Polish community and perhaps notice how steps that were taken there. We do not want to be repeating those steps, even if they are well meant, here. We'll be moving on to the next question.
Yes, and the next question will be asked by Anna Galandzi, who is a public relations professional and a volunteer and spokesperson with the community group Poland Street. Anna, the floor is yours. Do we have Anna online? I think we're having some connection issues here. Apologies for that. In which case, I will just read out the question on Anna's behalf. So many campaigners, as well as the European Parliament, have made that clear. Have made it clear that EU citizens living in the UK are at great risk of discrimination in jobs and housing. This is in part because the government will not issue a physical status proof as a part of the EU settlement scheme. And it shouldn't come as a shock. Immediately after the Brexit referendum in 2016, migrants, including Polish people, experienced a rise in hate crimes. The events of recent years, including Brexit, have had a tremendous impact on EU citizens living in the UK. What are your plans to ensure that EU citizens are valued and respected so that they feel a part of the London community? And let me just ask that this is actually an issue that is very interesting to many of our members of the audience who are getting in touch with us and asking additional questions. So let me just add that Alexandra raised the issue of hate crimes and xenophobia against Europeans that she observed herself. And also there was one more voice from Sam, who is asking again about guarantees for EU citizens' rights in the context of your party's policies and their standing with regard to the Brexit referendum.
Right. So the first person to respond, please, is Louise, if you would. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your question. I actually really welcome the opportunity to be able to answer this and to talk about the many ways in which we want to make all EU citizens feel as welcome in London as they ever were. So here in Wandsworth, I'm always really pleased to say that we voted with a huge 75% to remain in the EU. And ever since the referendum, have done a huge amount to try and ensure that people still feel welcome, but also have the help and the advice they need. So, for example, we funded Citizens Advice Bureau to do multiple weekly sessions to talk with many people about how they can apply for settled status, how it might affect their friends, their family, etc. We've also kept a really close eye on hate crime levels. I'm really pleased to say that here in Wandsworth, we haven't seen a rise, but that doesn't take away from the many lived experiences that I'm sure some of you have, that perhaps you haven't reported to the police. So again, I would encourage you, if you do experience something like this, please do report it, because if nothing else, then it illustrates to your local council, your local MP, that there is a rise, and then we can put in place all the measures that we need to from seeing this rise in hate crime, although obviously, of course, we want to do all that we possibly can to ensure that that never happens in the first place. So if Sean were elected mayor, one of the first things he would do is launch a huge PR campaign to get EU citizens to apply for settled status before the deadline happens on the 30th of June. He also wants to make sure that EU culture is celebrated going forward as part of London. So one of the things he wants to do, just for example, is to set up the Festival of London, a bit like Edinburgh Festival. It would be a month-long celebration and series of events to encourage tourists and Londoners to attend musicals, theatres, etc. It's part of his sorry, Kate, I'll wrap up. Part of his campaign to make sure that the arts continue to be funded and recover post-COVID. But yeah, City Hall should be there to provide grants, funding, infrastructure, advertising for all of these sorts of things. So while I understand your concerns, especially about the digital nature of settled status for application. I agree with groups like the 3 million who are pushing for proof. I'm really sorry.
Don't worry. I let you go on because you mentioned the arts and obviously as an actor and writer. But thank you. Thank you very much, Louise. Marijn.
Yeah, so I'm a Dutch national. I don't have British citizenship. I didn't think I would ever need it. So that was never a thing for me. I am, because I've been here for a long time, I do have settled status now. But the problem with the EU settlement scheme is that we know tens of thousands of applications have been marked as invalid or refused or withdrawn. There just needs to be a right to stay. You know, it shouldn't be about a right to apply to some kind of convoluted system which might reject them. These people are humans, they live here, they're part of this country, they should be allowed to stay here. So that's an obvious one. But in terms of on the London level, obviously, we need to call out these injustices. We need to make it much clearer. We need to be much more vocal about it. I live about 10-15 minute cycle ride away from Polish Community Centre in Hammersmith, and that has had its windows smashed. You know, I see the racism, the attitude, the behaviour on a daily basis. I hear it from my European friends who know that because of their name or their surname that they're not being considered for jobs, not necessarily because of a racist thing, but because you don't know what someone's status is. Do they have settled status? Do they have pre-settled status? What the hell does pre-settled status mean? So I think the most important thing is we need to call it out. We need to say it as we see it. And I think in City Hall that needs to be done leading by example. I think that's the most important thing. We need to recognize that it's happening, not try and hide it or pretend it's not there, but be honest about it and deal with it and make sure people know that is not okay behavior. So.
Thank you. Adrian.
Thank you, Kate. Well, as you all know, the Liberal Democrats are the most pro-European party, and we would never have wanted Brexit to happen. It is our long-term goal to rejoin the EU at some point in the future. And I'm afraid the way that citizens in London from a European origin, I'm married to a Finn, so I know exactly how important proof of settled status, and that's why our mayoral candidate, Louisa Porritt, who was also a former member of the European Parliament, and she's campaigned for the London passport and also to have physical proof of settled status. You know, one of the key foundations of being a Liberal Democrat is being a European, and I see that in myself as someone who is part of the community, and we want Polish people to stay and remain in London and become part of one of the most best multicultural, multi-faith cities in the world. And it's a real shame that there has been awful discrimination. We have seen hate crimes rise across London in various different boroughs, attacking people from different origins because of different surnames, but also attacking different communities. That is just not a British thing to do, and it's really disappointing that this has been encouraged by the result of Brexit. As a European and as a party, we are internationalists. We want the Polish community to stay here and be part of our community. And it's really, really important that you understand that that's something that's vitally important to our values and our beliefs as a party, and the fact that we've always campaigned to be the most pro-European party across all parties across the United Kingdom. We want people to remain here, so we will do everything we possibly can to help them to stay here.
Thank you, Adrian. And now Catherine, please.
Thank you very much, Kate. Labour has been very active on the EU settlement scheme, which opened, of course, as people know, in March 2019. And the Polish community is in the top 5 groups for having applications in, whether that's for settled status or pre-settled status. And we've asked a number of questions of the government, and Sadiq has had meetings with government ministers relating to what's called the hostile environment, which this government seems to want to continue despite the problems that we had with the Windrush generation and how that particular scheme ended up being so unjust to so many. And we have real fears that the current position that the government has on EU settled status could end up in a kind of Windrush situation in a few years' time. So we've at many Labour councils have tried to promote the rights of EU citizens, and of course the hub, which I described before at GLA level, has been very useful for people to be able to look up online as the scheme has changed, and as the scheme has changed its dates due to COVID. We are also hoping that the government will fund more proactive education campaigns through our schools so that our school teachers, particularly in the very diverse areas like our London schools, will promote understanding and education about people's the history of Poland, for example, and the history of both of our countries. In terms of the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants, which is a wonderful campaigning group, they have actually argued that the Home Secretary has acted unlawfully in terms of the scheme because they failed to collect, monitor and publish equality data about the scheme, which is in breach of the public sector duty. And if anybody would like any more information about that particular campaign, they could drop me an email after this, Kate, and I will fill in. But it is a very important campaign because it's about your rights.
Thank you. And Harini, please.
Thank you. The Women's Equality Party has always stated in our campaigns the explicit sentence, "We value migrants," and that's the same now as it always was, whether we belong in the EU as a country or outside the EU and from wherever the migrant comes. And you'll see that I have personally spoken out at many events against Brexit. And in particular, women's voices were not heard, as well as minority voices. But that's the deal that we have now. And we have to fight back. The fight continues. We as a Women's Equality Party support the campaign, the 3 million, to get a physical document. I think that's becoming an urgent issue now. The digital documentation is inadequate. It's already becoming a barrier to people seeking work, particularly the self-employed. And we know that minority communities and women are more likely to be self-employed. There was a story in the Guardian newspaper this morning that the most vulnerable children, which is those children who are in the care of local authorities because of difficult home environments, they are only 39% of those children have had an adult bother to make the application for settled status. And so the reference to Windrush is that there are children who have committed no crime or done nothing antisocial and should not be to blame in any way, are being left out of this new regime, and they will reach adulthood. We know for a start that children in care are disadvantaged. They don't have adults looking after them at home, and that's why the local authorities had to step in. So the most vulnerable people who, and the most vulnerable children are being affected by the lack of documentation. There's a court case going on, and you will see, if you're interested, the 3 million is crowdfunding for that, and you may wish to consider making a donation. So we need to take practical steps to make sure that the implementation of this Brexit, the powers that be are forced to do it in a practical way. And we should not be simply making grand statements. We have to support the grassroots activity and listen to people, vulnerable people, and make sure that we can soften the blow of the Brexit. But I also want to say that the racism is nothing new. Yes, it got better. Please don't feel it's the worst it's ever been. When we were growing up in the 70s, there was a lot of racism in the street, and things improved, and things will improve again if we work together.
Thank you, Harini. And actually, just to point out as well, the New Europeans actually have had a campaign for some years now about an EU green card, which is very much that, it's to have a physical green card that will help, you know, basically give physical proof of status when you're going for jobs or it's housing. So do look up New Europeans on that. Right, now, we are aware that we are running a little bit late, and we really just wanted to check in with the panelists. Are you able to stay with us for the last question? I understand, you may have various responsibilities, etc. But if everybody's all right, then we'll crack on to the last question. And thank you for sticking with us. It's been really informative.
Okay, so it seems that we can go ahead with the last question, and the last question will be again asked in Polish. So please switch to the translation channel, and it will be asked by Tomasz Kosmala, who is a cyclist in London. Tomasz, can you hear us? Please unmute yourself.
Okej, witam wszystkich. Ja właśnie przez ostatnie 2 lata staram się wszędzie w Londynie dojeżdżać rowerem. No i widzę, że dużo tutaj się zmienia na lepsze w tej dziedzinie. Jest dużo udogodnień, które często też są kosztem pasów ruchu dla autobusów lub samochodów. No i to ośmiela też nowe osoby, żeby zacząć dojeżdżać do pracy rowerem. Wydaje mi się, że największym problemem jest cały czas bezpieczeństwo rowerzystów, szczególnie i pieszych. Chciałbym zapytać, co Państwo proponują, żeby poprawić infrastrukturę rowerową, i szczególnie bezpieczeństwo rowerzystów i pieszych, i jak można ograniczyć emisję spalin przez samochody i autobusy.
Dziękuję. Thank you very much, Tomasz. So let me just briefly read that in English. For years, I've been trying to use my bicycle to get around London, and I've seen many positive changes to improve and create cycling routes in London. This encourages more people to feel safe when cycling, though often comes at the expense of both drivers and pedestrians. What specific solutions are you planning to propose to support and improve cycling infrastructure, reduce emissions from cars and buses, and ensure safety for all road users? But this issue actually attracts some more attention as well from our audience. And there was another question which goes a bit in the opposite direction from Camila, who is a driving instructor. And she says that for quite a while, she's been spending a lot of time in traffic jams with the current changes on London roads. So the 20-mile-per-hour zones, wider cyclist lanes, which aren't used by as many cyclists as cars on the road, bus lanes, which are very often empty, not in use outside of the peak hours, and as well as low traffic neighborhood zones, which mean that quite a lot of traffic is redirected to main routes, causing bigger traffic, higher pollution and frustration for road users. So we have the same issue, but two opposite takes. What's yours on that problem?
Right, first up, Marijn, please.
What a surprise. Ask the Green Party person first. Oh, I can't believe I only get 2 minutes. That's really frustrating. Yes, hugely controversial. Everyone has an opinion on this. And, everyone's opinion is valid. I don't own a car, I can't afford it, and I don't want to. I'm obviously Dutch and a cyclist. The most important thing, the LTNs, the low traffic network neighborhoods, are hugely controversial because of the way they've been implemented, right? There's a lot of social injustice issues around here where people in poorer areas are now seeing huge increase in traffic, where people are feeling that the more affluent areas are now nice and car-free and leafy. There's people who want to be able to drive. They feel that it's their right. These are all things that we need to be taking into consideration. This needs to be done through public consultations, and actually we would take it even further, not just consultations, but actual citizen decision-making processes as well, with deliberation and proper information given to people. one of the things that we really want to do is restore road policing capacity, because there are naughty cyclists out there, and we acknowledge that, and they should be on the cycle lanes or in the cycle paths, and they shouldn't be running through red lights. So, you know, just because I'm a cyclist doesn't mean that I think cyclists are saints. I fully acknowledge that. We do need to reduce speed. It's dangerous. It's emitting carbon dioxide and all sorts of other chemicals as well. We need to reintroduce school streets and play streets. We need to make sure that schools aren't surrounded by high traffic roads. And yes, this is a new thing, right? We're in the infancy of where we start caring about air pollution and the environment. So it is going to be difficult, and there are going to be increases on traffic. But don't forget that people also are avoiding public transport right now because of COVID. So to say that the increase is purely because of extra cycle lanes and LTNs isn't really fair. We don't really know what it is. And we need to ensure that at the same time as installing cycle lanes and LTNs, we also have other methods where we can offer people to get them from A to B. Also, just quickly on the cycle lanes, they're not connected up. So you have these amazing isolated cycle lanes, but you can't get there safely. That's why they're not being used. Once that infrastructure is all in place, you will see people will be on their
Thank you. Thank you very much. Adrian, next, please.
Thank you. Well, as Liberal Democrats, just as green as the Green Party, so following you, Mary, as they say, actually green transport is one of our 3 top priorities, along with jobs for local communities and homes in the city for people who are struggling to find homes. Those are our 3 lead policies, and green transport is really critical. One of those things is obviously trying to ensure that accessibility and making sure that these cycle lanes that exist actually do go to the right places, which are linked properly and are used properly. And I think that's some of the criticism that comes in. Sometimes they aren't brought in the best way possible. At the same time, though, actually air pollution is a really key green issue, and the mayor is seeking to build this ridiculous tunnel, Silvertown Road Tunnel, which is only just going to create more pollution, not going to help cyclists and walkers. And we're getting rid of good schemes like the walk bridge across from Rotherhithe to the other side of the Thames. And we're trying to ensure that those different ultra low emission zones, you know, we want to tackle lethal air pollution. I remember doing this standing 4 years ago on exactly the same green issues, and nothing has changed in London. And I'm afraid from our perspective, this is why we, from the Liberal Democrats, see green issues as such a high priority in the list of things to tackle, not only to ensure that people are safe, which is really, really important, but also to ensure that people don't lose their lives via horrendous air pollution. We know now of a young girl who's 9 years old who has had on her birth certificate put death by air pollution. We can't have that in a modern London, and therefore we really must step up to the plate and make sure that these green issues are put to the top of the agenda.
Thank you, Adrian. And next, Catherine, please.
Thank you, Kate. Cycling's been one of the best ways for us to get around. I try and get out on my bicycle and cycle into Parliament from Hornsey Lane. And Sadiq himself has invested in a bike to get from A to B, which is good. And I think it's great for your mental health, actually. So I think I would recommend safe cycling to everybody. As Marijn has said, some cyclists are naughty and go on the pavement, and they really should be pulled up for that. But basically, in the last 5 years, the amount of protected space for cycling has actually increased 5-fold. That's just because over the last 5 years, more engineering projects have been rolled out. That's included 100 kilometres of new or upgraded cycle routes since the start of the pandemic, plus more than 22,000 square metres of extra pavement space to enable social distancing, because don't forget, those of us who cycle also walk a lot because we get off the bicycle and push it, don't we? And obviously the ultra low emission zone, which is controversial, and it does show that tough decisions have had to be made over the last few years. That will be expanded to the north and south circular roads from the 25th of October 2021. And that is something which is a dividing line between us and the Tory choice for the Mayor of London. So that is something to bear in mind, because in the end, with some of these green initiatives, you do have to take a risk. So whoever is the mayor will have to take more risks if we're going to really tackle the climate change challenge. The other thing is about the bus fleet. It's becoming greener. There's around 9,000 buses now which are fully ULEZ compliant, including 12 low emission bus zones, cutting bus related emissions by 90%. So I think the figure is about 40% in the last 5 years in terms of cleanness of air. And as our colleague has said from the Liberal Democrats, that makes a huge difference to families. And I have met Deborah Kissey's mother. She's come into Parliament, and it was very moving to hear her story about how she lost her daughter to an asthma attack. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Catherine. And Harini next, please.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't mention last time that two of our Women's Equality Party London Assembly candidates are hosting an event online on the 8th of April, which is open to all EU citizens about issues affecting them in this election because of that status. Coming on to the transport question, I'm a typical London woman. I no longer have a car. I used to be a driver. Last 8 years, I haven't had a car as my children got older. I can ride a bicycle, but I've always been too frightened to cycle in London. And we look at the statistics, men make about 3 times as many journeys by bicycle as women in London, and they make much, much longer journeys. And we can't deal with environmental issues and transport properly unless we address the gender gap in cycling. And I'm not a scaredy cat. I just want to keep my children safe. And if I lose my head, I lose my livelihood. A few years ago, I went with great excitement to a scheme where I was supposed to get a free bicycle to use for a month, and then I could buy it at a discounted rate at the end of it. I had told them I'm a single parent, I have 3 children, I have to take them to nursery and to school on my way to work. And they said there'll be some kind of cart available. When we traveled to the park at the other end of Hackney, there was no such cart. I couldn't be in the scheme. I made a fuss. In the end, they gave me £10 to stop making a fuss and go away. Now, these schemes will not work unless we address the issue that the cycle lanes are not safe. We really dramatically need to reduce the volume of cars and the layout of the cycle lanes in order to make women feel safe. Now, it's a core objective of the Women's Equality Party. There should be equal caregiving by men and women, but that's not the reality today in London, and we need to be open about that. Women have different travel patterns from men, and there's lots of research which needs to be looked at, showing men tend to travel from A to B, from home to work by train mostly. Women do so-called chain journeys. They go from home to nursery to school to work to their parents' house and so on. So transport policies need to be made from the bottom up by talking to communities, and we will never support a transport policy which does not acknowledge the needs of disabled people and older people.
Thank you. And Louise, please.
Thank you very much. So I'm a cyclist, Sean's a cyclist. He's also asthmatic actually, and well understands the importance of air quality in our capital. I'm going to talk first about low traffic neighbourhoods. So I think the reason why they're so controversial is because TfL and the Mayor designated that any funding for these low traffic neighbourhoods would be pulled if they weren't implemented in a very, very short amount of time, which left no time for public consultation. So therefore, they were put in very quickly and with no consultation. And people overnight found themselves in these completely new ways of having to travel around. So I think one key thing there is that although the sentiment, I suppose, behind low traffic neighbourhood is brilliant, we need to ensure that there's a review, we need to ensure that there is sufficient public consultation and that they're not implemented unsafely or in unsafe locations. So I think that's really key. We also have a plan for cleaning up the air in London. So we want zero emission bus fleet by 2025. And also Sean wants to put in place interest-free loans for black cab drivers for them to go electric as well. That would take so many vehicles off the streets of London that are currently either diesel or petrol, and it would make a huge difference to our air quality. There are also lots of other things we can do. We can ensure that 20 miles per hour is properly policed. Again, policing sits under the remit of the Mayor of London, and so it would be for him to give that to the Metropolitan Police as an area of focus for them. There are new ways to travel. I actually first tried an electric scooter when I was in Warsaw. It was so much fun. I'm a massive convert, but we need to ensure that there are proper guidelines in place to use them to ensure that pedestrians don't feel unsafe, that cyclists don't feel unsafe, that people with dogs or buggies don't feel unsafe. Other smaller things like 50-minute neighborhoods, so ensuring people have everything they need near where they live so they can feel happy using it to travel and using cars less. So yes, there are loads and loads of things we have in place to try and improve the air quality within London.
Thank you. Right, now we're just going to round up. So I'll just hand back to my colleague Marta, and we'll just have a rounding up comments from our panelists.
Yes, well, that concludes the main part of our event, so the question and answer part. Sadly, we were not able to ask all the questions. We are really overwhelmed by the response from the audience that we are getting, because our viewers are very, very much interested to ask you about things like affordable housing in London and the general cost of living in the capital, about the care sector, which is, provides employment for many Polish migrants, in particular women. And they are also asking about gentrification in London and such issues. Well, sadly, we will not have the time to elaborate on those, but each of you will have now 1 minute to say a few words to your prospective Polish voters and encourage them to vote for yourselves, for your party, or for your mayoral candidates. And we will start with Adrian, please. 1 minute.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure to be part of the panel this evening. We are the most pro-European party, and we want our Polish brothers and sisters to remain with us here in the UK. So it's very, very simple. You have 3 ballot papers to vote on. Vote for our mayoral candidate, Louisa Porritt. Vote for our list candidates, top of the list being Caroline Pigeon, who is our current Assembly member and who would love to have a team with her in the GLA, and vote for your constituency candidate in all the different areas across London. We are here because we want to support you. We believe in communities, we believe in diversity, we believe in equality, and that's why you should vote for the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you very much. Catherine, it's your turn now.
Vivice. I'm not sure if I got that right, but lovely to be with you this evening. Thank you so much. It's been so much fun. I just wish that we could see the audience. Obviously, I would say 3 votes for Labour. We've had a really tough few years together, but as Londoners, we will stick together and continue to fight for the common good. We have a wonderful city. Yes, we have challenges. We have challenges, whether it's over the environment, whether it's over our housing crisis, whether it's over our jobs crisis at the moment. But together we can make London the best city in the world and make it continue to be the best city in the world. A huge thank you to all the community for all you do day in, day out to serve London and to keep London going. And I would like to see more social justice. I would like to see a city where we can be proud of our diversity, not trying to hide or having to talk about our racism. And good luck. Pass the word around. Everyone has to vote, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Harini, go ahead.
Thank you very much for inviting me and the Women's Equality Party to the event you've organised this evening. And I would like this to be the start of a strong relationship between the Women's Equality Party and our hosts this evening. And so I cannot invite you back, so I invite you please to find me. I am on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, and you will also find our website. I have an unusual surname, so if you Google me, I'm easy to find. We are standing Mandy Reid, who is our party leader, as our mayoral candidate. She's the first Black person ever to head a UK political party. She worked in City Hall for 12 years and she's a passionate campaigner. It's difficult for a small party, which is only 6 years old, to win the mayoral seat this time, but please listen to what we say in all our debates. The seat which we can win this time is on the orange ballot paper for the list member, and I have the privilege to be the lead candidate for our party. If you would like a feminist voice representing all women and men in all our intersectional totality, to have a voice at the table in City Hall, please vote for the Women's Equality Party on the orange ballot paper.
Thank you.
And Louise, over to you.
Thank you so much for inviting me along this evening and having given me the opportunity to speak with everybody. I would say that we know that we face big problems in London, but I think they started before the coronavirus pandemic hit. It has done nothing but expose, I think, how deep those problems really run. We've seen knife crime is at historic high. Good homes are unaffordable. Investment in our transport infrastructure has completely dried up, and the cost of living just keeps on rising. So for me, Sadiq Khan has had 5 years to sort this out. And so I think it's time for a fresh start. For me, that will be Sean Bailey. So I would encourage you all to have 3 votes for the Conservatives in London, and we can really make this city as diverse as we know it to be, and ensure that ourselves and our children are able to breathe clean air, afford good homes, and walk safely in our streets.
Thank you.
And finally, last but not least, Marijn, over to you.
Thank you. So I think what's really important to understand. Oh, sorry. Did you want me to start or not?
Yep, that's great. Sorry, there was a slight pause.
Oh, okay.
Go for it. Sorry.
So it's important to remember that this election, unlike the national election, which most of us can't vote in anyway, but this is proportional representation, right? So you can actually genuinely vote for the party that you want to represent, that you want in power. So I really encourage you to vote Green, because your vote for Green will actually go to the Green Party. I think we want to work for everyone. This isn't about certain people being better off than others. This needs to work for everyone. The climate and ecological emergency is a social justice emergency. And with the divide between rich and poor, privileged and underprivileged, we're never ever going to be able to fix it. So we need to fix social justice as well as climate and biodiversity loss. We want to protect our green spaces, want to protect our trees. We're losing trees in London left, right and centre. It's absolutely outrageous and mad. We want rent control to make sure that we don't have skyrocketing rent, pay rise, gentrification, obviously. We want to protect our council houses. We want them to be fixed up, not to be demolished. And yeah, I could go on, but basically vote for Sean, vote for the Green Party. We genuinely care. So we can't go wrong.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. But in order to vote, you have to be registered to vote. So one final request to all of you who are watching us tonight, please make sure that you register to vote. And you can do it until the 19th of April. If you would like to vote by post, in order to avoid going to the polling station in person, you can also register to do that by the 20th of April by 5 p.m. You need to deliver the form asking for postal vote to your local electoral office. And also, if you need more information, please visit our website. It's www.shevotes.org.uk. We have just launched the website in English, but this week it will also be available in Polish. So you'll find a lot of interesting information about our upcoming events and the elections themselves. And get in touch, get yourself informed, follow our guests, follow the candidates who are running in your constituencies, and get involved.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'd like to echo that. Your vote is such a hard-won right. It's powerful and fragile. So many of us don't use it, and yet it is very powerful. And as has been said here this evening, because of proportional representation, your vote will absolutely count. So please do use it, and follow what Marta was saying about following the She Votes website and following all the candidates, who I'd like to thank very much for joining us this evening. It matters a great deal that you've taken time out to join us, and I hope that this is very much a beginning of your relationship, or a continuation of your relationship with the Polish community in London, and that it's always good to listen as well. So it's great to hear you, and I hope that you will be continuing to listen and to act on what you hear from the Polish community. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, and big thanks also to our organizers, the fantastic team. If I may, I'll just very briefly mention their names, because you haven't seen their faces, but they've worked really, really hard to bring this event to you today. So that will be Marzena, Magda and Krzysia from Pomoc, Lydia, Elsa, Boromir from the New Europeans, Kamil from Polonia Express, and also all of our volunteers who asked the questions today. So Magdalena, Kamil, one more Magdalena, Anya and Tomasz, and everyone who is supporting this action and taking part in the She Votes Ona Głosuje campaign. Thank you so much, and thank you for your time.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.